Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us today for this very important webinar, Empowering Inclusion in Europe's Microelectronics Ecosystem. I'm Kartikesh Srivastava, Manager EU Projects at SEMI Europe, and I have the pleasure of opening today's session on behalf of the European Chips Diversity Alliance. Over the next 90 minutes or so, we'll explore how Europe's microelectronics community is coming together to champion DEI, not just as an afterthought, but as a driving force for innovation, competitiveness, and growth. EGDA brings together academia, industry, and policymakers to address one of Europe's most pressing challenges, unlocking the full potential of our talent base by lowering barriers for underrepresented groups. By doing so, we're not just making the sector fairer, we're making it stronger, smarter, and more sustainable for the future. Today's program will showcase the Alliance's recent progress, share new insights from across Europe, and present practical tools and training resources that organizations can utilize to build more inclusive learning and working environments. You'll hear about the latest DEI report on trends and challenges, learn from the Inclusive Learning Environments initiatives, and discover EGDA's DEI training suite, developed in alignment with EU standards. We'll also hear from a panel of outstanding speakers representing education, research, and industry, each contributing unique perspectives on how inclusion drives excellence across the semiconductor value chain. So before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce today's speakers. Nessa Maguire, founder of U.org, who will present the DEI report and share data-driven insights into Europe's diversity landscape. Matthew Coates, project manager for European educational development at Platform Talent for Technologie in the Netherlands, will highlight outcomes from the Inclusive Chips Forum held in September in Eindhoven. Richard Hart, user experience specialist at Learnovate, will explore strategies for inclusive learning environments that empower all learners to thrive. Finally, we have Stefan Schmuck, lecturer in liberal arts and management at ESCP Business School, who will introduce the DEI training suite, a practical set of tools to help organizations embed inclusion into their daily operations. We'll close with an open Q&A session, so please feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar via the chat or the Q&A panel, and we'll make sure the panelists do get to them. So once again, thank you for being a part of this event and for your commitment to building a more inclusive, innovative, and resilient microelectronics ecosystem for Europe. So without further ado, let's get started with our first segment. It's my pleasure to introduce Nessa Maguire, founder of U.org, who will walk us through the key findings of EGDA's latest DEI report. Nessa, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, I'm Nessa Maguire, founder of U.org and an advisor working with the European Chips Diversity Alliance. U.org is an Irish company that develops research and technology solutions to make workforce systems more inclusive and adaptive. We work with industry, education, and public partners across Europe to translate evidence into practical strategies for talent development. It's a pleasure to be here to share highlights from the Alliance's first DEI report. Data-driven look at where the European microelectronics sector stands today on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what we can do next. Let's start with why this matters. Europe's semiconductor sector is expanding rapidly, but the numbers are significant. More than 75,000 additional roles will need to be filled by 2030. Traditional recruitment channels alone will not meet that demand. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are therefore not peripheral concerns. They are central to achieving Europe's workforce and innovation objectives. Relying on a narrow talent base limits both competitiveness and social fairness. Broadening access to skilled work through more inclusive pathways and targeted workforce policies will determine how effectively Europe delivers on the ambitions of the CHIPS Act. This report combines three complementary strands of research. A sector-wide survey gathered quantitative insights from 73 professionals in the sector. 17 executive interviews provided strategic context from senior decision makers, while a focus group with 12 early career professionals captured a day-to-day experiences within organizations. Together, these sources give both a macro and micro view of how inclusion is currently practiced in the European microelectronics sector, highlighting where strategies succeed and where gaps persist. The data revealed 4 consistent patterns that explain both progress and constraint. First, strong innovation results driven by diverse teams are not matched by equivalent investment in long-term talent development. Second, strategic commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion often fail to translate into daily experiences for employees. Third, there remains a perception that inclusion slows technical efficiency despite evidence to the contrary. And finally, the sector's business-to-business nature limits public visibility, which in turn restricts talent attraction. These 4 patterns form the basis for the strategic priorities that follow. The first pattern is the performance paradox. Across the data, diversity correlates with stronger innovation outcomes. Nearly half of respondents said diverse teams enhance creativity and problem solving. However, only 1 in 5 organizations report exceeding expectations in building future talent. This gap suggests that while the sector performs well with the diverse talent already in place, the systems needed to sustain that success remain underdeveloped. Without a stronger pipeline, current performance levels will be difficult to maintain. Second pattern is the implementation gap. Executives describe clear DEI frameworks, dedicated roles, metrics, and governance, but employees often experience inclusion as inconsistent. Only 26% of early career professionals view DEI as visible in their daily work. This points to a disconnect between formal structures and lived experience. Inclusion is realized through everyday behaviors, how meetings are run, how credit is shared, and whose ideas are heard, not only through policy. The third pattern is the efficiency tension. Within technically driven environments, inclusion is sometimes perceived as competing with productivity or precision. Several participants described how mentoring or informal mediation work, often undertaken by women or minority colleagues, can be undervalued or invisible. Yet research across high-tech sectors show the opposite dynamic. Diverse teams detect design errors earlier and produce more robust solutions. When inclusion is viewed as non-essential, the sector loses both efficiency gains and the people most committed to sustaining collaborative culture. The fourth pattern is the visibility challenge. Microelectronics is a critical but largely unseen part of Europe's innovation system. Its products enable everything from energy transition technologies to healthcare and digital infrastructure. Yet few people outside the field make that connection. This limited public familiarity affects talent attraction more than reputation. Many potential candidates simply lack awareness of the opportunities available or how their skills could transfer into the sector. The opportunity lies in more coordinated communication, sharing the sector's contribution to Europe's priorities and making its career pathways clearer and more relatable. Visibility is not about image, it's about access and awareness. So what do we do with these findings? We've distilled them into 4 priorities that respond directly to the evidence. They're practical, sector-specific, and designed to work collectively rather than in isolation. The first priority is strengthening the talent pipeline. Early outreach is essential, but it cannot stand alone. Europe needs a wider definition of who the pipeline includes: apprentices, career changers, people re-entering employment, and those currently unemployed but with relevant skills. Nearly 3 million young people under 25 are unemployed across Europe, and almost half of disabled adults face barriers to enter and work. Connecting these challenges with the semiconductor skills agenda is both an equity issue and an opportunity for growth. Shared outreach models, recruiter training, and simplified mobility processes would help convert available skills into real workforce capacity. The second priority is to make inclusion visible in everyday operations. Many organizations have policies in place and still rely on informal or volunteer-led activity to sustain DEI efforts. That approach creates inconsistency and limits long-term impact. Embedding inclusion within existing management systems, from project planning to performance reviews, gives a continuity. Managers in technical environments, in particular, benefit from structured tools to lead diverse teams, address biases in decision making, and manage cross cultural collaboration effectively. When inclusion becomes part of daily leadership, it translates policy into measurable practice. The third priority is pooling resources for issues that cut across organizations. Disability and neurodiversity are gaining attention, but most initiatives are still pilot scale. Coordinated frameworks would allow companies to adapt proven approaches without starting from zero each time. The sector also faces an age profile shift. In several member states, data shows a concentration of workers above their 50s, highlighting the need for structured knowledge transfer and flexible retention models. By sharing training, benchmarks, and data, companies can move from isolated efforts to collective improvement, accelerating progress and ensuring alignment across Europe. Fourth priority is coordinating visibility. Microelectronics underpins Europe's competitiveness, but remains largely unseen outside industry circles. Most people interact with the technologies enabled by chips, but rarely associate them with European innovation or careers. A coordinated communication approach, highlighting how semiconductors support the green transition, health technology, and digital infrastructure, can help reposition the sector as both purpose-driven and future-oriented. These messages should reach beyond students to underrepresented and unemployed groups, linking opportunity with societal impact. Visibility is ultimately about access. People are more likely to consider a field when they can recognize its relevance to their lives. Achieving meaningful progress will depend on treating diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strategic business priority rather than a compliance requirement. That means dedicated resources, clear ownership at leadership level, and transparent reporting on progress. Integrating it into workforce planning, innovation processes, and leadership development embeds inclusion within the sector's performance framework and strategic reporting. Shared partnerships across companies, education providers, and research bodies also allow data and learning to flow more freely. When organizations can benchmark, share evidence, and align their interventions, the impact becomes cumulative rather than fragmented. To conclude, the European Chips Diversity Alliance was created to help this sector grow stronger through evidence, collaboration, and shared accountability. The data is clear. Inclusion and competitiveness are interdependent. Broadening access to skilled work strengthens innovation, retention, and Europe's technological resilience. The next step is collective implementation. Each organization can identify where its greatest leverage lies, whether that is strengthening early stage outreach, building manager capability, improving data quality, or joining joint visibility campaigns. Progress in any one of these areas contributes to a more inclusive and sustainable European semiconductor workforce. Thank you for your time and for the commitment so many of you are already demonstrating. This work is not only about fairness, it is about ensuring Europe has the talent and creativity required to deliver on its strategic ambitions.
Hello, my name is Matthew Coates, and I work for the Dutch National STEM platform, PTVT. Today, I would like to talk about the Inclusive Chips Forum. This was an event which we hosted as PTVT through the European Chips Diversity Alliance project, itself a project funded by the European Commission and aimed at enhancing inclusion in Europe's semiconductor sector. So, in this event, we selected three topics to primarily focus on. What I will do now is I'll briefly go over these topics generally, and then look at each topic and the outcomes of the forum as they pertain to that topic, as well as giving some context to why the topic was selected. First, we addressed good practices towards inclusion in industry. What this entailed was sharing stories and examples about initiatives which proved themselves to be effective when promoting inclusion in industry organizations. We did this with the hope that by explaining what works and what doesn't work in this area, attendees of the forum could go home with some valuable lessons learned if they would like to initiate similar programs in their own contexts. Next, we looked at the phenomena of DEI backlash. DEI backlash is where political leaders or companies have become tired of DEI as a topic. It's very popular today, particularly in the United States, for leaders to be pushing back against inclusion initiatives. And so we thought it would be important to look at ways to counteract this phenomena. We did this by hosting a panel discussion on the topic, which included representatives from education, industry, and government, and how they handled DEI backlash in their own fields. Next, we looked at the Dutch Beethoven Plan. This is a policy in the Netherlands which is putting a great deal of resources and financing towards enhancing the Dutch human capital capacity for the production of semiconductors. The Dutch population is decreasing, as is interest in STEM subjects in school and STEM careers, generally speaking. What this means is that if we continue along the trend which we are in now, the Netherlands won't have enough people to maintain its significant position in the global semiconductor field through companies such as ASML. With that in mind, the Dutch ministry has has developed the Beethoven Plan to try to increase human capital as it could be used for semiconductor production. So let's get into the details. First, good practices towards inclusion in industry. We at PTVT generally like to share good practices across Europe to other national STEM platforms. We do this primarily through the EU STEM Coalition. We believe that a lot of the problems faced by Dutch industry, government, and education are common challenges and can be addressed jointly. Yeah, we believe that when we try to tackle these shared problems together, we're more likely to have success. So we share best practices as much as we can. And we wanted to do this in the inclusive CHIPS form as well. We saw three programs which are aimed at better inclusion in industry that I have selected for this presentation today to share with you. Now, just to provide some context for these programs, the Netherlands, as I said, has a decreasing population and fewer people than ever that are interested in STEM fields, right? With this in mind, a lot of Dutch industry has had to look abroad to find the talent needed to carry on with work as usual. However, a reoccurring problem is that foreign workers will come to the Netherlands and then not want to stay. They'll go home. This happens for a number of reasons, but it's hard to get people to settle down here in the Netherlands. So one way to address this challenge is the local buddy program. The local buddy program is an initiative which matches foreign workers with Dutch employees, foreign employees, well, employees of foreign backgrounds with employees of Dutch backgrounds together in the program, and then host social events for them, cultural events, and generally facilitate them getting to know each other better. This is done with the hope that by developing a social network in country, foreign employees will be more likely to both feel comfortable and then stay in the Netherlands. Next, we looked at a program that pertained to spousal employment. As the name would suggest, this program helped the spouses of foreign workers to find jobs in the Netherlands themselves. It'll often be the case that a family will come to the Netherlands to work in a Dutch company, but of course, only one member of that family will be working for the company, and the other member will not, and will be unfortunately unemployed. This, of course, is not ideal for a family, and makes it less likely for them to stay in the Netherlands. So to address that, the spousal employment program helps find jobs for the unemployed spouse in that partnership in the Netherlands. Normally, this is quite hard because there are language barriers, and yeah, you won't necessarily have a network in the Netherlands. Both partners won't have a network in the Netherlands. So the spousal employment program takes all these factors into account and tries to guide the unemployed spouse to a job that matches their background and experience. Then we looked at one policy held by a company pertaining to contracts, to employment contracts. Oftentimes in the Netherlands, it's the case that companies will give foreign workers temporary contracts for as long as they're legally allowed to. This happens likely because they don't want to take the risk of permanently hiring a foreign employee, finding them or believing them to be unpredictable, or believing that by hiring someone from a foreign background, the company is taking an undue risk. Now, the company that presented their approach to giving contracts to foreign employees had a different take on it. They saw foreign representation and outside perspectives as being a strength in their company, and they wanted to encourage employees of foreign backgrounds to stay rather than just towing them along for as long as they were legally allowed to. They did this by immediately providing them with a permanent contract. By doing so, they say to them that they're committed to them as individuals and that they value their external perspective. And this policy apparently has also shown to be quite effective. Of course, when you show commitment to someone, they are likely to show commitment back. Okay, next, let's talk about DEI backlash. So, as I said, this was primarily addressed through a panel discussion we had between industry policy and education representatives. And a lot of great points came out of this discussion, but two stood out to me in particular that I'd like to present to you today. One of which was when dealing with a group or a leader who is tired of DEI and sees DEI as a frivolous ideal and not having any real value, always pitch the topic primarily as a business strategy. And remember the bottom line. Yeah, what that means is introduce DEI not as only a nice idea or a way to be fair or something like this, but primarily as something which has intrinsic value. So highlight that organizations and teams that have a diversity of perspectives actually put forth greater value, and that you can see this in their productivity, and that there's tangible data to back up this point. So it's not just a nice idea, but it actually has it imparts real value by its own right, by virtue of itself. So lead with they recommended that when facing opposition, lead with that fact. Next, they recommended that we remember DEI is not about exclusion, but rather about inclusion. So oftentimes, people who are reluctant to involve, to intentionally pursue DEI, believe or are concerned that by doing so, they will squeeze out individuals who are from a predominantly represented background, right? The predominant group represented in their company or team or whatever. But this isn't the point of DEI. There are many ways to be inclusive, and depending on the angle you look at from, lots of different types of people can fall under inclusion categories. So in inclusion is not just about putting in more women or putting in more people of foreign backgrounds. It can entail people from cognitively diverse backgrounds, or people from different ages, this sort of thing. So it's not about just balancing the books when it comes to gender or ethnic groups. It's about providing a more holistic representation in your team. Lastly, we looked at the Beethoven Project. So the Beethoven Project invests 450 million euros towards human capital development in the semiconductor industry. This is just to be clear, the 450 million euros, that is just the segment of the plan which is focusing on education, on the human capital development part. Now, a significant amount of the resources put towards this part of the plan do focus on inclusion, on reaching out across borders to make the Netherlands a more attractive country for foreign workers, as well as for promoting STEM careers to women in the Netherlands who are otherwise underrepresented in both in the tech industry as well as in STEM educational paths. So we thought it'd be important to include some background to this policy as sort of I suppose, a good practice in its own right, however, in the field of policy. Because we believe that the background which led to this this plan is shared by many different European countries. So I will discuss this background a little bit now. It was born from the realization that the only way the Netherlands can maintain its relevance in the chip sector is through investing in education, which is to say, by making sure that the future workforce has the skills it needs to continue to maintain the Dutch position as it is in semiconductor production. So as I alluded to earlier, interest in STEM is going down. There are large segments of the Dutch population which are not represented in the Dutch semiconductor industry, and if things were to continue the way they're going now, the Netherlands wouldn't have the human capital to maintain its position. So that's why so much of this 450 million euros, which will go towards human capital development, is focused on early education, so promoting STEM in early education, and including underrepresented groups. Because, like I said, women are very underrepresented in the Dutch semiconductor industry, and also the Dutch semiconductor industry relies heavily on foreign experts moving to the Netherlands and working here. Another point which was emphasized to give background to the Beethoven Plan was the value of a cross-sectoral approach. So yes, the Beethoven Plan is a policy of the Dutch government. However, it isn't just the government telling the semiconductor industry what to do or schools what to do. It very much incorporates the perspective of industry and education in its approach. This is an ongoing activity which involves a dialogue between government, education, and industry. And that will be essential for informing the direction of this plan and looking at its effectiveness in the future. Lastly, the plan emphasized, well, the plan showed the importance of using a holistic strategy to address the talent shortage. So what this entails is not only trying to remedy the problem through education or by investing in the skills needed by companies, but also by setting up the basic infrastructure which is needed to accommodate a population that is working more in the semiconductor industry. For example, part of what the Beethoven Plan will be doing is making sure that there are homes for people to live in near where these companies are located, that there is sufficient public transportation to bring people to and from work. It's not just taking a monochrome approach to developing human capital in the country. It's trying to approach it from all angles to make sure that it goes as smoothly as possible. So while this is a young policy, we believe it's very impressive that the Netherlands would take such a forward-looking approach to its economy, and we think that it can be an example to other countries in Europe who are facing similar challenges. Okay, thank you very much for listening to my presentation and for your time. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, about any of the examples which I went over in my presentation, please don't hesitate to contact me at the email address which you see here on the screen, and I'd be happy to discuss the matter with you further. Thank you and goodbye.
Hello, I'm Richard Hart, User Experience Specialist at Learnovate. Today I'll be talking about inclusive learning environments. What is an inclusive learning environment? The Yale Poorvu Center for Teaching and Learning defines an inclusive learning environment as one where all students feel supported intellectually and academically and are extended a sense of belonging in the classroom, regardless of identity, learning preferences, or education. What are the benefits of inclusive learning environments? Enhanced learning, which leads to richer classroom discussions. Student engagement, which leads to higher motivation and participation. And improved career readiness, which prepares students for diverse workplaces. DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, is closely related to inclusive learning. Let's think of the meaning of DEI. Diversity is the presence of differences within a setting. Equity is ensuring fair treatment, access, and opportunity. And inclusion is about creating environments where all feel welcomed. DEI is therefore about ensuring a sense of belonging, whether in the workplace or in the classroom. Professor Thomas J. Tobin, who wrote a book for the Irish government and Ahead Ireland on inclusive learning and further education, stated that inclusive learning design is step zero towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. So why is DEI important? while diverse teams of people drive creativity, leading to greater innovation. Diversity also enhances product reach, leading to greater market relevance. And good DEI policy attracts and retains talent, leading to a greater talent pool. Current challenges in the microelectronics industry include skills shortages across multiple fields and sectors within the industry, systemic issues hindering inclusion among some cohorts, the low participation of women and minorities, and non-inclusive cultures across many organizations, leading to greater attrition. How can inclusive learning environments help? Making the classroom more inclusive can increase participation and retention of students in courses related to microelectronics, thereby widening the potential talent pool. It can attract students who may not otherwise have considered career pathways in microelectronics, and it can help students develop empathy, self-regulation, and resilience, which are important traits for onward career journeys. UNESCO outlines a number of basic characteristics of inclusive learning environments. This applies to all levels of learning, from primary through to tertiary education, and even beyond. For example, the UNESCO guidance includes examples of accessible, welcoming environments, such as physical spaces, learning materials, and teaching practices which are adapted to meet the diverse needs of all learners. It also includes guidance on how to increase the participation and engagement of students, such that all students are actively involved in their learning and encouraged to participate in class activities. It also speaks about teacher training and support, such that teachers are equipped with the knowledge, skills, and resources to create inclusive learning environments. The UNESCO guidance is intended to introduce readers to concepts and the important trends in inclusive education. It is quite high level. To further understand inclusive learning, let's look at some core principles that exist which guide learning designers to make their learning environments and learning content more inclusive. Universal Design for Instruction, or UDI. Let's consider the 9 principles of UDI, which are closely related to the 7 principles of universal design. UDI is intended to be proactive and beneficial for all students, in contrast to providing accommodations for a specific student, for example, a student with a disability. The 9 principles include equitable use, flexibility, simple and intuitive learning content, perceptual information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space for approach and use, community of learners, and instructional climate. We won't have time today to go through all 9 of these principles, but we can provide examples of 3 of them. Perceptual information means using videos that include accessible subtitles or captioning for those who may not hear, for whom English is not a first language, or for those who have trouble processing verbal information. Low physical effort can mean simply providing lecture notes, so students who have difficulty taking notes do not need to take notes. And size and space for approach and use could mean simply making seating easily accessible, if possible, so everyone can see each other and communicate with each other more directly. Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is closely related to Universal Design for Instruction. UDL contains 3 principles, with each principle consisting of 3 guidelines. The 3 principles are: provide multiple means of representation, provide multiple means of action and expression, provide multiple means of engagement. Again, we don't have time to go through all 3 principles, but I can provide you with information about the 3 guidelines relating to the first principle. Guideline 1, provide options for perception. Guideline 2, provide options for language, mathematical expressions, and symbols. Guideline 3, provide options for comprehension. So what do these 3 guidelines mean in practice? Well, for example, font, text size, character and line spacing, character width, background color, and text colors can all be enhanced to ensure greater accessibility. We can consider the size of images, graphs, tables, and other visual content. We can consider if the contrast between background and images is appropriate, or if the color used for information or emphasis is appropriate. The entire UDL framework is available online, and there's a lot of content out there that is free for people to look at. So what are the key barriers to inclusive learning environments? The disconnect between theory and practice, not knowing where to start, lack of resources, time it takes to adapt material or courses, and of course, lack of stakeholder buy-in. Educators are often aware of inclusive teaching principles, but struggle to apply them practically in their own classroom context. For example, microelectronics is a heavily lab-based and technical subject, and therefore teachers may not have enough examples of how to apply it in that specific context. Educators can become frozen by the various options which are available to create more inclusive learning environments, and therefore may delay implementation. There are many sources of guidance, and that can create decision paralysis. Limited access to subject-relevant inclusive teaching materials, for example, microelectronic examples that are contextually relevant and that show the practical implementation with findings. Inclusive redesign often requires reviewing syllabi and slides, updating lab manuals, changing assessment methods, and embedding inclusive examples, and even changing physical environments, all of which are time-consuming. And finally, creating an inclusive learning environment is not just the job of the educator. It involves the support of the students and the entire organization. Both these groups may resist inclusive learning practices for different reasons. If you're feeling the disconnect between theory and practice, start small. Why not pick one principle from the UDL guidelines we saw earlier, for example, offering multiple means of engagement, and apply it to one lesson? For example, allow students to choose between a short written reflection or a quick audio clip to demonstrate their understanding of a complex topic. You can always start simply and just see how it goes. Start with the syllabus. Ask yourself, where do my students often struggle or disengage? Why not run a quick Mentimeter with students and ask them where they struggle? Then adapt just one part using UDL, like adding a visual to explain a complex concept or embedding a short video. You don't need to do everything at once. Let's consider a simple contextual scenario. Consider the problem encountered in the scenario, the solution provided, and then reflect how you might implement the solution or a similar solution in your own classroom. Meet Martin, our microelectronics educator. He is an experienced educator in microelectronics related subjects in university. We will look at atypical scenario Martin encounters in his classroom. When Martin teaches microelectronic lab sessions, he notices that it's often the same confident male learners answering questions and demonstrating in lab discussions. While he appreciates their enthusiasm, over time he realizes that he is unintentionally giving most of the class time to these confident male learners. Meanwhile, quieter students, including women and those from different cultural backgrounds, rarely get the chance to contribute. Martin realizes that perhaps his method of engaging students by asking open questions to the classroom is not inclusive. Martin decides to implement a number of new practices in the classroom. He begins to track who he calls on during discussions and starts using randomized methods, like drawing names. He implements structured turn and talk activities, ensuring everyone has the chance to speak, whether to their peers or directly to Martin. Sometimes he asks students to team up to propose a question to the class. He begins using tools like Mentimeter or other tools like Slido so that students can ask questions during the lecture without having to speak aloud. He also leaves these Q&A chat rooms open after class. By recognizing an engagement problem and slightly adjusting his teaching practice, Martin creates a more inclusive learning environment where all voices can be heard. Thank you for your time. We have seen information on the basic definitions of inclusive learning, introduction to UNESCO guidance, introduction to best practice frameworks such as the Universal Design for Instruction and Universal Design for Learning. And we've seen the barriers to inclusive learning environments and how to overcome them. Thank you for your time. If you would like to know more, there is a range of resources. For example, you've already seen the UNESCO guidance, but there's also the UCL Inclusive Learning Toolkit, the CAST Universal Design for Learning Framework, which is available on the CAST website, the AHEAD Inclusive Learning Guidance for Educators, the UDL Bose Self-Evaluation Support Tool, the University for All Resource Hub, SEMI's DEI Toolkit, and Brickfield Education Lab's Guidance for Accessibility. All of these are available online. Thank you for your time, and remember to visit the ECTA website or the ECTA LinkedIn page to keep up to date with the project. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.
Hello and welcome. My name is Stefan Schmuck. I'm a lecturer for liberal arts and organizational behavior at ECP Business School here in Berlin. Today, I want to talk to you about what empowering inclusion in Europe's microelectronics ecosystem can mean. To do so, we will dive into the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Suite, short DEI, developed by the European Chips Diversity Alliance. So, without further ado, let's start. When we talk about Europe's ambitions in the semiconductor industry, we often focus on technology, on capacity expansion, research excellence, and strategic autonomy. But behind every design, every process improvement, every breakthrough are always people. People who think, collaborate, experiment, and learn. Innovation at its core is a human activity. And like every human system, it depends on how well we work together, how we value and include the diversity of perspectives that drive creativity and resilience. That's why inclusion isn't an optional feature of progress or ethical imperative alone. It's the foundation that allows innovation to grow and sustain itself. Research across disciplines shows that diverse groups outperform homogeneous ones. And that's not because diversity makes things easier, often on the contrary, but because it challenges assumptions and expands collective thinking. This is, of course, not an automatic process, but if done right, inclusion is what allows diversity to function. It ensures that different perspectives are not just present, but heard and integrated. In innovation-driven sectors like microelectronics or the semiconductor industry, that difference translates directly into better problem solving and more resilient and competitive organizations. Across Europe, the semiconductor ecosystem is facing a significant transformation. Production capacity is increasing, technologies are advancing, and demand for skilled professionals is soaring. So, the talent challenge is real. By 2030, Europe will need tens of thousands new specialists, from engineers and researchers to managers and technicians. Meeting that need requires more than technical training. It requires workplaces that attract, engage, and above all, retain diverse talent. Here, inclusion can help make that possible. It ensures that everyone, regardless of background, gender, or career stage, can contribute their skills and ideas fully. And it is when people feel they work in the right place that they stay, they grow, and ultimately innovate. The D&I Suite was developed by the European Chips Diversity Alliance, a consortium of partners from the semiconductor industry, higher and vocational education, and training providers with a simple but very ambitious goal. That is, to help organizations and individuals move from awareness of diversity and inclusion to practical implementation, and thus aid them in addressing the current global challenges around talent and innovation. It is a structured learning and action framework that includes 5 modules and 7 operational tools, all tailored to the specific realities of Europe's microelectronics and semiconductor sector. The D&I suite gives professionals the methods, examples, and tools to act in ways that make inclusion part of daily work rather than an occasional initiative. It's designed for HR professionals, engineers, educators, students, and leaders alike. In it, each participant can find something directly relevant to their role and their organization. Now let's have a closer look at the framework. As I said, the framework is structured around 5 interconnected modules, which you can see here on the slide. Each builds on the other, but they also work independently, thus helping to create a learning journey that starts with understanding, but also leading to long-term transformation. The first module, Understanding D&I, introduces the key concepts and explains why inclusion matters, not only ethically, but specifically strategically. It helps participants see how D&I supports innovation, productivity, and competitiveness. In the second module, My Role in D&I, focuses on everyday practice. It explores how small, consistent actions, for instance, how we listen, how we give feedback, but also how we work together, collaborate, shape inclusion far more than policies alone. Module 3 looks at diversifying the workforce, and this goes systemic. It looks at hiring, evaluation, and career progression. It gives HR teams and line managers practical tools to reduce bias and create fairer, more inclusive processes. With Module 4, we look at inclusive leadership to help build skills leaders need to create trust, psychological safety, and fair opportunities so all voices are heard and every idea can be tested. And last but not least, Module 5 bridges education and industry and connects the learning institutions with companies, ensuring that new generations of professionals see a place for themselves in this field. Together, these modules combine theory and practice, but more importantly, they link personal awareness with organizational change. One of the D&I suite's key strengths is that it produces outcomes from the start. It doesn't wait for cultural change to emerge someday in the future. It helps participants create tangible improvements in their day-to-day work right away. Let's look at some examples. First, inclusive talent or inclusive talent processes. This refers to inclusion in recruitment and career development. And this is not just an HR responsibility. It depends on the active involvement of middle or line managers, those who design roles, identify potential, and make daily decisions that shape opportunities. When HR and line managers work together to review how jobs are defined, how interviews are conducted, and how decisions are made in the workplace, inclusion becomes part of the organization's natural rhythm. The result is simple but powerful: fairer processes, broader talent pools, and in the end, stronger teams. A second example regards better communication, especially in teams. The reflection prompts used throughout the trainings help managers and practitioners rethink how they do things, how meetings and decisions happen, aiming at creating a more balanced discussion and avoiding groupthink. A third example, helping leaders to become more confident. Inclusive leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being consistent, setting clear expectations, recognizing contributions fairly, and building trust. The suite's practical frameworks help managers make this part of their leadership routine. And finally, consistency. Across Europe's semiconductor ecosystem, the D&I suite offers a shared vocabulary and approach. This consistency means that different organizations, whether they are in Germany, Italy, or the Netherlands, can learn from each other and work towards a common goal. These are outcomes that matter today: better communication, stronger leadership, fairer process, and teams that collaborate effectively. But the D&I suite also looks beyond the immediate and perhaps the most important dimension. Its long-term promise lies in shaping a more inclusive, innovative, and resilient European semiconductor ecosystem for the future. Over time, the small daily actions participants take build up a systemic change across the organization. When inclusion is assured in the processes, policies, practices, and personal attitudes and teamwork, it changes how organizations attract and retain talent. It improves branding and reputation. It strengthens innovation and creates cultures that people want to be part of. In the long term, then, inclusion becomes not just a value, but it is a competitive advantage. Companies that integrate DEI into their processes see higher creativity, better problem solving, lower turnover, and higher innovation potential. The D&I suite provides a framework to make that long-term transformation sustainable, not as a campaign or a trend, but as a shared capability embedded across the ecosystem. What makes this framework approach distinct is its focus on collaboration and shared learning across all partners. The D&I suite reflects that. It was co-created with experts, practitioners, and educators from across Europe. It doesn't tell organizations what to believe, it helps them learn how to act, measure, and improve. It connects inclusion to excellence and excellence to innovation and performance. In that way, it mirrors the European spirit of unity and diversity: pragmatic, balanced, and focused on long-term sustainable solutions. Creating and maintaining an inclusive culture is not a sprint, it is a marathon. There is no quick fix. It requires patience, persistence, and practice. The D&I suite provides the groundwork for that journey. It helps professionals and organizations in the ecosystem start where they are, identify what they can improve, and build change step by step. Because inclusion grows through practice, through small, consistent actions that over time shape the culture of an organization. And in so doing, inclusion becomes more than a goal. It becomes a capability, a way of working, leading, and innovating together. The D&I suite empowers professionals across Europe's semiconductor industry to translate inclusion into action, strengthening teams, unlocking innovation, and future-proofing the sector. It connects today's needs with tomorrow's possibilities, practical tools for today, sustainable progress for tomorrow. The D&I suite is empowering inclusion in Europe's microelectronics systems. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much to all the speakers for the insightful presentations. We're going to move on to the Q&A session now, and we're joined by Matt Coates from PTBT and Nessa Maguire from Udo.org for this. We've already received a couple of great questions from the audience, but if you have any more, please do send them via the chat, and please tag the speaker you want to ask, and we'll do our best to cover as many questions as possible. So perhaps, Nessa, I can start with you regarding the DEI report, which is now available publicly on the ECDO website, and I definitely encourage you to read that. But Nessa, the question is, how can organizations use the report effectively?
Thanks, Gartke. I would say so. I suppose as a first step, it would be to read the report. I know it is quite long and comprehensive. We do have some summary sections. So if you don't want to see, the kind of the individual data and the breakdown, there is that possibility to read the summary sections. But I would then say once you've kind of absorbed all the report, it's really important to look at the recommendation section, because this report is not there just to kind of sit on a shelf. It's meant to be there to guide the sector in terms of action, not just individuals within organization action or organizational action, but also collaboration action. So I think it's thinking about looking at the recommendations, seeing what aligns with your organization, what's realistic. So perhaps, one of the recommendations resonates with one of the struggles your organization is having at the moment, and looking at, and if needed, also looking at collaborating more broadly across the sector, because one of the main findings in the report is that collaboration across sector is going to be needed to address these challenges, particularly around the talent gap.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. No, I couldn't agree more. Collaboration is the name of the game, and we need to do more of that. So yes, like Nessa said, please do read it first, and you can get a lot of tips from that as well. I'll now move on to Matt from PTVT, who spoke, of course, about the Eindhoven event that was held under the ECTA banner last month. The process of sharing best practices was a theme of Matt's presentation. But the question here is, how can it be that good practices are useful across the very different contexts which exist in Europe? As in, will it be really useful for people in Spain to know about what's going on in the Netherlands? So Matt, I'll leave that up to you.
Kartiki and everyone else. Well, first, thank you for that question. That's a great question. And I think you've hit upon an important dimension of the sharing of best practices. Yes, you're right, or the questioner is right, of course, that every example and every story comes from a particular cultural, national, or policy context that is unique. And they should be respected as such. And so in order to share good practices in a useful way, it's essential that you do this with the input and, let's say, translation of local actors. And that's where the EU STEM Coalition comes in. So the EU STEM Coalition is a network of STEM platforms, which is to say organizations in countries that are empowered by their governments to develop STEM education in their national contexts. This network, that is the EU STEM Coalition, both shares best practices from those national contexts, as well as helps translate them translates them in such a way that it'd be useful for the member of the EU STEM Coalition, which is looking for a given best practice. By taking into account the specific, the realities in which these best practices are being attempted to translate into, as well as giving insider insights into their own experience with implementing whatever example we might be considering. That's basically how it happens. I think the theme of this answer is perhaps, again, cooperation. It can only be done through cooperation. It can't be done top down. It really has to be done bottom up with everyone's support. But when we do have everyone's support, then this method can be very useful, and it can be a great benefit to all when we communicate across borders. I hope that answered the question sufficiently.
It did. Yes, Matthew, thank you so much. Couldn't agree more. I think this has been the theme, not just of the answers today, but of the webinar as a whole. Cooperation is important, and I think that's what we're seeing in the European Chips Diversity Alliance project, which has 11 partners from all over Europe. If there's no more questions, then I think we can potentially close the webinar. It was really great having you all joining us today. We had 4 expert takes on what's going on in the ECTA project: Vanessa Maguire, Richard Hart, Stefan Schmoke, and Matt Coates. ECTA is really, gearing up to make a difference in the semiconductor sector. We have our trainings coming up on the e-learning platform over the next month or so. So those are expert trainings developed by our consortium members. We're also implementing a mentorship program, ambassadorship program as well. So there's a lot going on. We recommend that you follow us on social media, visit our website, just to see, what we're up to. But otherwise, it's been a real pleasure having you with us. And thank you again to all the speakers for sharing their insights. And yeah, I wish you a great day. Thank you so much.